Hey guys, welcome back to yet another video. I'm Sandeep and welcome to Rev Atlas. And in this video, we're going to be taking a look at the review of the Asus ROG Zephyrus G14. Now, this lineup of laptops comes with the Ryzen chipsets from AMD, and it's something that I personally have been looking forward to for a long time, and I'm sure many of you have been looking forward to it as well. And in this video, we're going to be taking a look at it in detail to see whether or not it's worth your money. Now, before we get started, I thought that we can make use of this new studio setup, and especially for products such as laptops where there's a lot more going on, and it's better to have an on-hand experience and actually showcase it to you in front of the camera. I thought this makes more sense as a format as opposed to just having voiceover. Now, I got the impression that most of you prefer the voiceover format, especially for phones, and that's why we're going to be sticking to that. But for laptop, let's try something like this because it's generally more in detail and there's more stuff to show you. So now, before we get this started, please do make sure to hit the subscribe button and also turn on notifications for more videos like this. Now let's begin the video. Now, before we get this started, I'd like to make clear on what exactly our config is and what our model is. So I'll be putting the full model number up on screen right now, along with the chart of all the different SKUs that you can go for. But basically, the SKUs are divided into four main categories based on the GPU itself. So you have a model with a GTX 1650, a GTX 1660 Ti, a GTX 1660, and finally the RTX 2060 Max-Q, which is the one that we have here. And this also comes in two different variants based on the color and the outer lid. So this color is moonlight white, and you also get a darker or a gray or black sort of variant, and you can also choose between having an outer lid with an anime matrix, which this one has, and we'll be talking about that very soon. And apart from that, you can also choose between three different processors in the Ryzen lineup, which is mainly the 4600HS in the Ryzen 5, 4800HS from Ryzen 7, and last but not the least, the 4900HS, which we have here from Ryzen 9. So I'd like to start talking about my personal example and then moving on to the G14 itself. So I currently own a MacBook Pro 2017 Touch Bar edition. This is the 15-inch model, and this is what I've been using as my go-to editing machine. Sometimes when I feel lazy, I just want to sit on the couch and edit, but mostly when I'm traveling outside and want to get stuff done on the go, or where I'm at events and I don't have access to my PC. Now, over the past 2 years or so, I have not really been enjoying this because I find the export times, the rendering times, and all these things quite a bit more slower than my PC. But more than that, I just don't find it working too well with Premiere Pro. So the Final Cut perhaps works really well on this, but I'm a Premiere Pro person. I've been using Premiere Pro for quite a while, and while I used to use Final Cut 7, Pro X is not really my cup of tea. So apart from all that, the main thing is I find this a bit too bulky. It's actually quite a bit heavy, although it has a very slim profile. I find this form factor quite a bit bulky, especially considering how I'm trying to reduce my overall load, especially when I'm traveling. Of course, now you can't really travel and we are not traveling, but then again, if I'm going back to traveling, I'd like to have something lighter and smaller, and I think this is probably the best form factor for the same. Now, I do understand that this is a bit thicker than the MacBook Pro, but when you look at the overall footprint and overall weight, it is actually quite a bit lighter, and it also has me covered better in terms of the port situation. Now, if you look at it, on the MacBook Pro, all you get is basically 4 USB Type-C ports and an audio jack as well. Now, that's not bad. USB Type-C ports are great, and it's better than having a micro USB port, for example. But of course, at times you need a USB Type-A port. In my particular case, for example, I'm using my camera tethered to the laptop to shoot. I have to go and make use of a dongle like this with a USB Type-C port, and I also have to use the same thing if I want to connect my voiceover mic and a bunch of other accessories which still use USB Type-A. That way, the G14 is much better. It comes with two USB Type-A ports. These are USB 3.2 Gen 1 ports, and you also have two USB Type-C ports, one on this side and one on the other side, and they are USB 3.2 Gen 2 ports, out of which the one on the left side actually even has DisplayPort 1.4 as well as power delivery. Now, compared to the MacBook, that is a huge step increase, because most of the time what I'm doing is basically doing a voiceover or things like that, and I always have to connect a dongle, which is annoying at times, especially when you're traveling. That way this has me almost sorted. Now when I say almost, the main reason for this is the fact that this does not have an SD card. I feel that in 2020 people need to start giving SD cards if they want creators to be using it more, and in fact this is one laptop that they expect creators to use it more than other people such as gamers. So while this can definitely game, and we've tried that as well, this is definitely meant for creators because this particular model also comes with a 1440p screen at 60 Hz. There's also a 120 Hz model available at Full HD, but this is a 60 Hz model, and I feel this is a great tool for content creators. So I feel a SD card slot would have definitely helped and would have come in handy, and that way I feel that this thing still needs to travel with you. You might still need a dongle like this, or maybe a smaller adapter just for the SD card slot, because you still get an HDMI 2.0B, you get the headphone jack, and otherwise you're more or less covered in terms of the port situation. And speaking of which, I actually like this case. I actually thought it would be a good idea to show you the case right now, because this goes in here, and you can also keep your mouse or anything else that you might carry in hand, and the laptop goes in here. But the downside of this is the fact that this is in black while we clearly have a white laptop. So I really wish that they would have given a color matching sort of one, because this is a cool looking carry case or pouch, but I definitely would have liked to see a white one come along with this. Now in terms of the overall design, this has a very Stormtrooper like design, I would say, and it's one of the most beautiful laptops that I've seen in the recent past, and I love the overall ergonomics of it. I love the overall design, the handling, etc. Like I said, this feels very unwieldy now after using the G14 for a while. This is more or less like what do you call it, something that you would prefer to keep on a table and work, while the G14 is something that you can also keep on your lap and work, provided you're okay with things getting a bit warm. Now we'll speak about that, but let me talk about the design first. The overall footprint is very nice, the thickness is decent, and it feels very good to hold and use, and I have no issues with that. One of the issues that really bothered me was the hinge, the way that you actually open the hinge basically. So there is no indent or cutout here to actually open this, so at first when you're trying to lift it, it doesn't really go up. So you can either do one thing by using two fingers and opening it up, or you can actually push a bit and then lift it up. So either way works, but actually you have a higher chance of success when you actually use both fingers. And I feel that a slight indent here, like most other laptops, would have definitely made sense and would have helped the overall situation in terms of ease of access to the laptop. Now in terms of the display, I liked it and I also didn't like it. Now there are two sides to it. So if your usage is primarily indoors and you're going to use this as maybe a desktop replacement for editing and you're just going to hook it up to an external display, then you're not really worried about this. Or if you're using it mainly indoors or around the house or in your office, you're going to be fine. But if you're actually traveling somewhere, using it in the car or in a train or the flight, you might have issues, especially related to brightness, because the panel does not get all that bright. Now the anti-glare coating on this works fairly well, but what I noticed is that if I was sitting by a window and there was sunlight falling directly on it, things got a bit too difficult to read or a bit difficult to use. So that way I feel that the brightness could have been much better, and this is not all that great in that front. But when you look at the panel overall, this is Pantone validated panel. This is the 1440p version that we have here, which is great for creators, and I just loved editing on this. I had no issues, especially compared to my 4K screen that I normally use for editing. Of course this is a smaller screen, so pixel density is also good in that sense, but if you prefer a 1080p panel or you want a game, then you can go for that, because that also supports 120 Hz refresh rate. Now in terms of keyboard, I didn't expect this to perform as well as it did, and I kind of am used to my desktop keyboard layout, and generally when a laptop comes in for review, I end up making a lot of mistakes during the first 2 to 3 days when typing, because things are offset to one side or something or the other is wrong in terms of the spacing. But in this, I love the spacing, I love the travel, 1.4mm of travel. It gives good feedback and is just great to type on, and more so it's great to edit as well. The thing I didn't like about the keyboard is mainly the fact that the backlighting is not strong enough, and I saw Dave2D's video, and what he mentioned is that it looks brighter on the darker model, but on the lighter model it actually doesn't look all that bright. Now this could be something that he's right about, but I wouldn't know unless I had the black model side by side as well. Now other than that, you get four keys here, one for the armory crate from Asus, you get the volume keys as well as the mute switch, and you also get the power button here, which surprisingly also has a fingerprint scanner in it. And I was actually not expecting it, although I was looking for the fingerprint scanner everywhere. I didn't actually understand it was there because they've actually neatly hidden it, and once I saw it, I was like obvious that it was there. But the thing I didn't like about that was the accuracy. After the initial setup and after the initial few days, I'm not sure what changed, but it just stopped recognizing my fingerprints, and it didn't do well after a point of time, and I got a very low success rate. So I'm not sure if it's a faulty fingerprint scanner on this one, but I wasn't very impressed. Coming to a trackpad, this is a glass trackpad, and although the size is not quite as good as my MacBook Pro, I still ended up liking this because generally trackpads on Windows laptops are not very good. So a few exceptions that I've seen is basically the XPS Liner from Dell, and this is also one of the best that I've seen, and overall I quite like the experience. This scrolling was smooth, and I was able to move everything, but at times it did have a tendency to be oversensitive. So apart from that, it was a great experience, the touchpad itself. In terms of the audio situation, you have two speakers, 2.5 watts, as well as two tweeters, which are at 0.7 watts each, and they are located here and here, as well as at the bottom over here. And the overall experience is not all that great, and in terms of the decibel level that we recorded, we got just under 86 decibels. Now we even have smartphones, to be honest, that get louder than this, and considering that this is a compact laptop, even if you take that into consideration, I feel that it could have been much better in terms of the overall output. I'll just play you a clip just to understand how loud it can get. So the bass is there, and it's decent for music, but if you actually listen to any vocals, or suppose you watch another review video, for example, it does not get all that loud, and I feel it could have been a more impressive and immersive experience, because Asus generally tends to pack in good audio hardware, not always but most of the time, and this is again an exception where they could have done better. Now I'd like to talk about the display again. Before we move on to the other aspects. So this is a 14-inch panel, and I love the bezels, which are very thin on all three sides, but the thick bottom bezel is actually very annoying, and especially more so because there is no webcam included in this. Now in 2020, suddenly we see a huge surge in the number of people actually using webcams, and of course it is difficult for any company to predict something like this is going to happen. So the natural sort of thing to do is bundle an external webcam, which is what Xiaomi had done with their Mi notebook lineup. So they had started developing the laptops in 2018, and by the time everything was done and dusted, they see that there's a huge number of people using webcams now, so they bundled an external one. Now Asus had done this with their initial laptops, but they didn't do that with this particular one, and I don't understand why. So I feel that they should be bundling webcams with this, especially in 2020 where a lot of people are using it. If they don't have one on board, at least they could give an external one, because it doesn't cost all that much, especially when you look at the number of laptops that they sell. Now the backlighting is pretty even, but if you actually look at it in a dark room with a black background, you actually see some unevenness here and there. But then again, this is only when you actually nitpick and look at it in very dim lit scenarios, but for your regular usage you don't come to know this at all. Now this comes with a 76 watt hour battery, and it is rated for over 10 hours of usage on a single charge. In our usage we got easily 9+ hours, so we would say that their claims are more or less true. And also for 4K editing, we did a 4K editing test, and this was able to hold on good for around 2.5 to 3 hours of editing 4K video, which is pretty impressive. Now I would suggest using the bundle charger, which is a 180 watt charger, and just plugging it in onto the left side where you have the port, and then charging it and then editing off that. But of course you would need to use it on the go as well, considering you have a laptop that's meant to do that. So I do understand when you need to use that as well. In terms of the placement, I don't actually like this too much, considering that this is not all the way up here or at the back like some of the other Asus laptops, which tend to be a bit better. But again, it's not a major deal breaker for any. And you also have the USB Type-C port here, which supports power delivery, and you can charge it up to a maximum of 65 watts. So for casual usage and general usage, that's fine. But if you're actually editing 4K videos or even 1080p videos, there's a good chance that if you're using the power delivery option, that you would be consuming more battery than you would actually be topping up. So I would still suggest sticking to the proprietary bundled charger in order to charge it, especially when you're video editing. Now moving to a performance bit, let's first discuss thermals before moving on to the benchmarks and the export times. The idling temperature is around 33 degrees, and while editing 4K content in a room with just a fan turned on in Hyderabad, the peak temperature that we recorded was 41 degrees on the keyboard deck, while it reached up to 46 degrees on the D plate and the exhaust region between the screen and bottom chassis. So I would say that this is something that's ideal for desktop or on the table sort of editing, and not something that you would prefer to have on your lap for a long time, considering that it gets quite warm, especially on the D plate. This is another reason for the fairly sizable bottom bezel, I guess, that is to avoid any issues to a screen due to heat from the exhaust fans. In terms of the internal temperatures, the CPU idles in the mid 50 degrees Celsius, but it quickly ramps up the temperature when you do any heavy tasks, and we easily hit high 90s when running benchmarks and even when editing. Luckily, the thermal throttling wasn't too aggressive and it still performed fairly well, but the fans do work extra hard to ensure that the temperature doesn't go up further and is very audible at max speed. In an air-conditioned environment, it should do better though, but we wanted to test it in a typical Indian household environment as well, which may not include an AC. Speaking of editing, the laptop was able to edit 4K videos just fine, and we were able to play it back at half the quality without any choppiness, but at full quality it did stutter at times. While the export times were quick enough, I did feel that it was a bit slow in terms of the rendering times, especially say when applying warp stabilizer compared to my desktop rig, which isn't an apple to apple comparison, but definitely is worth knowing. In terms of benchmarks, we got a single core score of around 1000 and a multi-core score of around 6500 on Geekbench 5, and the Ryzen 9 4900HS got a score of 3769 points on our Cinebench R20 test, while the RTX 2060 Max Q, it got a score of 5983 on TimeSpy 3D and 2783 on TimeSpy Extreme 4K tests. While the rest of the performance was pretty much top notch and ideal for creators or gamers, what was disappointing was the SSD, which is an Intel 660p QLC SSD, which may be acceptable for a cheaper laptop, but not one that costs Rs 1,61,990, which is the pricing for our particular variant. G14, by the way, starts at Rs 80,990 for the regular variant and Rs 98,990 for the Anime Matrix variants. Now talking about the Anime Matrix display outside, so this here, this sort of perforation here, this is where you can see it, and this by default is set to actually show up only when you connect the charger, but you can also set it to be always on even when you're not charging, and you can customize the picture, you can customize text and a lot of other things, and it's a very cool feature to have, but it's a bit of a gimmick as well because this primarily benefits other users. It's meant to attract eyeballs and it's meant to sort of turn heads, but I'm not sure how useful of a feature it is, especially considering that this, according to Asus, consumes 1 hour more of battery life, compared to not using it. So of course you have to spend more for this version, but I'm not sure if it's a feature that is essential to have, particularly because this is also more fragile, I would assume, considering that this has a bunch of LEDs under this. So any drops or things like that, there are more things that can go wrong with it. It's definitely great to have, it's definitely a nice feature which I enjoyed shooting as well. But again, if you're looking for a laptop that is performing well, I'm not sure if you necessarily need to have this. But if you're someone who likes to have something unique, something that stands out, then this definitely makes sense. Now I'd like to sum up this review in probably a very different way, and I like to say that if there was a laptop in 2020 that I would choose as a replacement for my MacBook Pro, then the G14 would be it. Now of course this isn't a perfect replacement for it because there are things that the MacBook Pro still does better. For example, the MacBook Pro can charge faster over USB Type-C. MacBook Pro has better speakers. MacBook Pro has a better fingerprint scanner. But for the things that really matter, I would say that this definitely overtakes the MacBook Pro, maybe even the latest MacBook Pro that's available on the market. For example, you have the Type A ports, you have a better looking design, I would say. I'm kind of fed up with the overall design language that MacBook has. I love the keyboard in this. Even the new Macs, I feel the keyboards aren't all that great. The keyboard in this definitely gives much better feedback and is much more enjoyable to type on compared to the MacBook Pro. The overall battery life is great, the performance is great, and overall, as something that a creator would use, I feel that this is the ideal tool, and I would definitely recommend this to anyone who wants to create on the go, or just think of this as even probably a desktop replacement in a way. So that's it for this video, guys. Hope you liked it. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, do let us know in the comment section below. We'll also be giving a link in the description if you want to purchase this. See you again in the next one. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button.